Hey everybody, welcome back to Stone Mountain Adventures. Today, we're cooking some pulled pork. I get asked all the time, what's the best way to make some pulled pork? What's the best way to cook a pork butt? What's the best way to make pork, period, ribs, whatever it might be. And guys, I'm going to tell you, you don't have to have big fancy smokers. You don't have to have a big fancy pit barrel. You don't have to have, not the brand, but a barrel pit. You don't have to have an offset. You don't have to have a stick burner. Literally, you can do this in your backyard with probably a kettle like the one that's sitting on your porch that you've not used in so long. I'm going to do that today. I haven't touched my Weber Kettle in over a year. I haven't cooked a pork shoulder in over a year. I haven't cooked pulled pork, ribs, anything like that in over a year. So we're getting back to the basics. Y'all stick with me. I'm going to show you how to do it. Let's get started. First thing we're going to need is a pork shoulder. Now, I bought this one a while back. It's been in my freezer. I let it thaw out for about 3 days. This is a 9.57 pound pork butt, and it's supposedly a premium pork butt. You don't have to buy premium. I don't even know what premium means, but you do need a pork butt. You're going to need some mustard. Now, a lot of people say, oh, I don't like mustard. Well, guess what? You don't taste the mustard. Mustard's literally just a cheap way to get your rub to stick to your meat, and also helps to start doing that absorption process and get those meat sweats that you hear about, and it's going to just overall enhance your cook. Now, you can do this with olive oil, avocado oil, something like that. That's fine too. I've just always used mustard. The next thing you're going to need is a rub. Now, I'm using Cosmo's dry rub. It's their Dirty Bird seasoning. Use whatever you like. Off the shelf stuff, I mean, you can find this in Walmart, any other big box store, I reckon. You don't have to use this. I like the flavor of it. I've used it a little bit here around the house. That's what I'm going to use today. Now, I'm going to use this big foil pan, or tin, whatever you call it, just to get everything seasoned up. Once we get out there on the Weber Kettle, we're just going to lay this straight on the rack. I've done it in pans before to try to save all the juice that you can. Honestly, I can't really tell a difference. This is going to help get that bark and everything like that set up, just being right on the rack. So, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, once you've got cleaned up a little bit, you're going to go ahead and take some paper towels, and you're just going to want to pat this dry. It gets a lot of that excess brining solution they put in from the factory off of there, but also just makes it overall easier to handle. It's not as slimy and slippery. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're just going to want to inspect your pork butt. I'm looking at the fat cap on here. You can see that from the butcher. They've nicked a lot of the fat cap off. If you want, you can take this off. I'm going to leave it on there. I'm just going to look at some of the fat that I don't like the looks of, and I'm going to take that off. So we've got a little bit over here. Just going to go ahead, take that little bit of fat off. You want to look for any kind of discolorations, any kind of weird textures to the meat, anything like that. If your pork butt looks fine out of the pack, by all means, go ahead and skip this process. But I always like to inspect the pork butt and see what we got going on. Now, if you had like big, huge flaps hanging off, you'd want to go ahead and take those off because you want it to cook as even as possible. But honestly, this is a pretty good looking pork butt. So now that everything's cleaned up, dried up, we're going to go ahead and we're going to score this fat cap. Now, you don't have to do this process, but I do think that it helps to get some more seasoning down into the meat. So we're just going to come in and go about, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch in. And we're going to turn it and go the opposite direction. This kind of helps during presentation too. It makes it look a little bit better. All these little slices are going to open up during the cooking process and give you that checkerboard kind of pattern on the top. Now we're going to go ahead and get our mustard. Take your mustard and just slather this thing up. Now I go back and forth between calling it a pork shoulder and pork butt. Oddly enough, there's a weird misconception that everyone thinks when you talk about pork butt, it's actual pork butt. But it's really not. It's pork shoulder. The butt would technically be the ham. And you've got a couple different shoulder roasts. You've got the actual pork shoulder, or the pork butt they call it, which is this. And then you also have the picnic roast, which includes a little bit of the shank, or the forearm. So now that we have our mustard slathered on here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our rub, our seasoning, and we're just going to liberally coat this thing all over. Now, another misconception is when they call this a rub, everyone thinks that you got to rub your seasonings into the meat. You don't. Actually, you don't want to do that because it makes an uneven layer of your seasoning, and it can give you some thick spots that get crumbly, or maybe they don't render into the meat, and it makes a little sticky seasoning ball whenever you bite into it. You don't want that. You want a nice, level, even bark all across your pork butt, and this is how you're going to get that. You don't want to rub everything in, because when you push this, your fingertips are going to push a piece of the rub to one side, and it's just hard to get everything evenly coated that way. Once you have all your sides coated, you can go ahead, and then some of this excess, just go ahead and pat it around. And then you just let it sit. Once you've got everything rubbed down, you just let it sit. What it's going to do is the sugars and the salts and everything in this rub is going to bring out the moisture in this meat. And then while it's doing that, it's going to absorb into the meat. Now, smoke sticks to cold, wet meat. A lot of folks say to let your meat come up to room temperature. There's science behind that too if you're doing a steak or something like that. But when you're doing barbecue, you want to have as much smoke on that pork as you can. And that's how you do that. You let this thing sit and you let it sweat. So while we're letting it sweat, we're going to go ahead and get out to our kettle, and we're going to get our charcoals running. Today we're going to do a snake method, which is essentially where you stack briquettes all around the edge. Some people don't like it, some people do. I've done it several times and I love it. So we're going to go ahead and make the snake method. I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. We're going to get it lit up, and then we should be ready to go ahead and throw this pork shoulder on there. Let's go outside. All right, as you can see, it's a little cold outside. Don't want to put my coat on. But we've got our kettle set up. We've got our meat in there sweating out. Let me go ahead and show you what I've done to get the kettle going. So as you can see, we've got charcoal lined all around the outside edge of the kettle. And what I've done here is I've stacked 3 layers. It's about 72 briquettes in the main snake. And then I've got about 4 or 5 right here on top of one of the little tumbleweed fire starters. And what that's going to do is when these coals light up, they'll eventually light this set, and then it'll continue on all the way around. And what that does is it helps you regulate the temperature, but also leaves your heat on the outside edge. And by using your vent on your lid, it'll let you choose where you circulate the smoke. Now for smoke, what we're going to be using today is a B&B charcoal. They have some wood chips. We're going to be using pecans, but we're going to be using pecan chips, but we're going to be using them dry. What that does is it lets it smoke longer, and you don't have to wait 30 minutes to wet your wood, and you don't have to use a box or anything like that. Also, we're going to be putting a water pan down in here. This is going to also serve as a heat barrier, but also to keep moisture in the pit to not let your pork dry out. We're going to fill this up with some water. So let's go ahead and get our tumbleweed lit. Now as that tumbleweed burns, it's going to go ahead and light our charcoal. Now a lot of you may be saying, well, charcoal, isn't it bad for it to burn and be smoky like that? Yes, if you're using things like matchlight or things like that. These Weber Briquettes, they're all natural, 100% all natural hardwood charcoal. It's similar to like if you were using Royal Oak or something like that. These are just compressed into the briquettes. I've used the Kingsford Blue Bag. I've never gotten sick, never had anything to worry about. Some people say that they're full of carcinogens and all that stuff. I get it, I understand the worry, but people have been doing this a lot longer than I have, and it produces a great product. So do at your own risk. How about that? All right, we're gonna let this get caught up. We're gonna go ahead and throw our grill grate on there, and then once we're up to temperature, we're gonna go ahead and add our water then, and go ahead and add our wood chips. We don't want to add our water right now because as it heats up, a lot of our water will evaporate and we'll lose out on that water. So kind of saving a little bit of time. So let's go ahead and let this get warmed up, put our grill grate on, and we'll see you back whenever we're putting that big pork shoulder on here. These are the wood chips we're going to be using. Like I said, B&B 100% natural smoking wood chips. On the back of their bag, they talk about dry and wet methods. We're going to be using the dry chip approach. They say for a steady, slow release smoke, try the dry chip method of placing chips loosely around the edge of your fire or nearest the heat source. The heat will allow the chips to slowly smolder for more intense smoke. So what we're going to do is we're not going to put them right on top of where our coals are burning. We're going to start a little bit further back. What that also does is allows the pit to come up to temperature before these start to burn. Once the heat starts to get close to them, these start to smolder and start to smoke, and then they burn off eventually. But if you do it along the outside edge, it continues and gives you a smoke all through the cook. Alright guys, the coals are finally lit good enough to go ahead and expect the wood chips to start burning. So we're going to go ahead and put our pork butt on. We've got our water already in our pan. We're going to go ahead and throw this thing on here. Now, I don't know how well y'all can see that, but you see the sun glistening off that thing? And there's juice already in the pan. Like I said, this thing's going to get nice and wet. All that moisture inside of it's been drawn out. Now we're going to throw it on the smoker. Now we're putting it right over top of our pan, right in the center. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and close our lid. And we're going to make sure that our vent is on the closer to the side of the pork. That way when the heat starts getting to the backside, it has to travel over top of that pork to get out the vent. Also, what we're going to do is make sure that we set our vent down at the bottom, our intake vent, to about a quarter of the way closed. So we're going to go ahead and pull that closed a little bit, and that should get us going where we need to go. I'm going to go ahead and let this go for a couple hours without even looking at it. I'm going to trust the process. I don't really care what the thermometer says on this side as far as the temperature. We're just going to let it roll. I expect this to be a pretty long cook just because of the way these briquettes are burning. Like I said, I'm used to Kingsford. Usually Kingsford lights up and burns pretty hot pretty quick. These are taking a lot longer. It's been about an hour since I first lit these coals. So we're going to go ahead and let it go. We'll check on it in a couple hours and see what it's looking like. All right. All right, guys, we've had the pork butt on for exactly 3 hours. So let's go ahead and open it up and see what we're looking like, see what our coals look like, see how much of that snake method has went ahead and burnt down, and see if we need to do anything. Sometimes the only downside to this method is sometimes you run out of coals. After a long cook like this one, you'll run out of coals and you'll have to kind of adapt. I've ended up pulling the butt off, pulling the grate out, putting more coals in, and letting it go back the opposite direction. So let's go ahead and pull the lid, see what it's looking like. Oh yeah, see that pork butt starting to open up there? And you can see we've got our coals have burnt about a quarter of the way through. That pecan wood is starting to smoke real good. This is where you would decide if you're going to start spritzing the meat or not. As you can see right there, the bark is starting to set a little bit, but we've still got a little bit of moisture on the top, so we're going to go ahead and let it ride probably another hour or so, and then we may start spritzing it with a little bit of water. This method, you don't want to leave the lid off too long, so let's go ahead and get it covered back up. And we're going to let it go ahead and go another hour or so. Only thing I'm going to do is put a little bit of water in a spray bottle. That's just going to help me in case I come out and check it again and it looks a little bit dried out. We can just go ahead and spritz the meat real quick and take care of that. Some people put apple juice in their bottles. Some people put a mixture of water, vinegar, apple juice and vinegar. Tons of different things. Water works just fine. Let that seasoning do what it's going to do. Let that rub do what it's going to do. And so we'll see from there. But all right, so we're at hour 3. I expect this to be 7 to 10 hours, honestly, so it'll probably be dark the next time you see me, but we're going to let it go and see what happens. All right, guys, it's been a little over 6 hours. We're going to go ahead and take a look at it again. I'm going to go ahead and probe the meat just to see where we're at. I'm going to use this thermopop just to see kind of where we're sitting. Temp on the thing here is showing like 300, but that just tells me that the snake has worked its way around to this backside, and we've got a lot of direct heat right underneath that. So I'm still not worried about temps, not changing anything on the vents. Everything stayed the same this entire cook. This will probably be the last time we check in before you see me pulling it apart and getting it out. That bark is really setting. It's looking great. Let's go ahead and get our thermopop. We're just going to go right in the center here. So we're showing about 130 there. And way down in the center, I was hitting the shoulder bone right there. Right here, we're showing 128. So we've still got a ways to go before we're even in the stall. So it's going to definitely be dark by the time I would normally wrap this. And like I said, you can see back here, the coals they're about halfway done. So this shows you here, guys, this snake method, it holds temps for a really long time. And it's a great way to smoke big pieces of meat on your Weber Kettle. I'll check back in with you guys whenever I am pulling this thing apart. All right, guys, we are done. The current time is 11:50 p.m. It almost took me into tomorrow, but we got it done before that. What I did after the last time y'all saw an update was I went ahead and let it come up to where I felt like the temperatures were stalling out. Now, normally you wouldn't wrap a pork butt this early, but I wrapped it at around 140, 145 degrees. It had set around that temperature for a little over an hour and a half, and I just didn't want to go any longer. So the bark was looking good. The fat was starting to render really nice. So I went ahead and made an executive decision to go ahead and wrap it up. I laid it down in this foil pan and then brought it in the house, put some butter pads on top, sprinkled a little bit more of that rub on there, and then drizzled it with some honey, wrapped it all up in foil, threw it back on the pit. Nothing on the pit changed. We didn't add anything to it at that time. We just threw it back on the pit and let the kettle do the job. After that, we just kind of set it and forget it. We didn't mess with it. We didn't touch it. We didn't probe it for at least a couple of hours. And then at about 10:30, it finally came up and was probing that just buttery, like a hot knife into butter. And it was temping about 195 to 198 degrees. I brought it in, laid a towel over top of it, and let it sit for an hour. So we ended up pulling this a little bit after 10:30, and I've let it sit for about an hour. Let's go ahead and tear into it. I mean, just separates, so tender. I can smell that pecan wood. It's juicy. You can see all the juice that rendered out, and a lot of that's because I wrapped it so early. Here's our bone. It's probably still hot. It is. I mean, look at that. If that's not fall off the bone, I don't know what is. It looks great. It smells great. I've missed the smell of barbecue in the house. Let's go ahead. You can see that smoke ring. That bark had set pretty well. That fat cap rendered really nice. Let's go ahead and get us a piece here. Nice little smoke ring. Nice little piece of bark. Not too sweet, not too salty. That's a good rub to use if you're not looking for something that's going to be overly sweet, overly spicy, or overly salty. It's a good middle of the road rub. The fat's rendered really well. I just want to keep biting it. So there you go, guys. That's pretty much barbecue 101 for me. That's a pretty in-depth how-to on how to smoke a pork butt. It's how I've done it for years, and it's how I still do it. No matter the cooker, no matter the utensils, no matter the tools, the process is still the same. Whether you're doing this on a pellet smoker, whether you're doing it on a stick burner, whether you're doing it in a Weber kettle, it's all still the same. As long as you know how your cooker works and know what you're doing, you're gonna have a good time. Pork's pretty hard to mess up, so y'all give it a try. Let me know what you think about it. Let me know how it turned out. Be sure to find all my links. I've been setting up some Amazon affiliate links, stuff like that. Check that out in the description box below. Some of the stuff that I use on a regular. If you've seen it in a video, you might see it on there. No obligations. I get a little commission or something, I guess. I don't know how it works. I've not been doing it long enough, but something new to try out to add some little revenue. But anyway, that's gonna be it for tonight. I'm going to bed. It's late. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. God bless.